following presentation is an edited short story based on a popular historical memoir, verbally recounted by Scottish-born John Dickson, and later written by one of his very interested listeners. Dickson was a corporal in the renowned Scots Greys regiment, which gained legendary notoriety when they took part in the epic cavalry charge of the British Union and Household Heavy Cavalry Brigades at the Battle of Waterloo on June 18, 1815. This ferocious cavalry attack, launched in the early afternoon, had succeeded in destroying Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte's massive French infantry assault, which was on the verge of splitting the Duke of Wellington's Allied army's front line in two. Dickson survived the tragically led charge that saw only 1 in 10 of the Scots Greys attackers return back to their lines. He miraculously made it through the rest of the horrific battle. Many of his comrades were not so lucky. Dickson lived in Scotland when he left the army, discharged as a troop sergeant major after 27 years of service. He recounted to his audience of friends and family what he remembered of his close encounters during the Scots Greys charge at Waterloo. While much of this rousing memento has credible details throughout it, there are several parts that are apparently added, as after-the-fact embellishments by the writer, to enhance and fill out the consistency of the story. For example, there are moments which Corporal Dickson could not have witnessed based on his stated locations. Even more disputable are all the well-known key events that had happened during the Scots Greys attack across a wide area, which have all been added into the account. Dickson has been placed conveniently everywhere on the spot to observe all these incidents taking place in his presence, which was near impossible. John Dickson was the last known Scottish survivor of the Battle of Waterloo. He died in Surrey at the age of 90 in 1880.
In 1807, when I was a lad of 18, being a good Scotsman, I joined the Greys, the oldest regiment of dragoons in the British Army, and our only Scottish cavalry corps. When news came in the spring of 1815 that Napoleon Bonaparte had landed in France, we were sent across to Belgium. Besides our regiment, there were the 1st Royals and the Enniskillens. We were known as the Union Brigade because, you see, it was made up of 1 English, 1 Irish and 1 Scots regiment. On the day before the great fight, that was Saturday, for you know, the battle was fought on the Sunday morning, the 18th of June, we were marched from Catarbre along the road towards Brussels. In a drenching rain we were told to halt and lie down away in a hollow to the right of the main road. No rations were served that night. As we sat round our fire we heard a loud rumbling noise about a mile away, and this we knew must be the French artillery and wagons coming up. That night a fearful storm burst over us. The thunder was terrible to hear. It was a battle royal of the elements, as if the whole clouds were going to fall on us. We said it was a warning to Bonaparte that all nature was angry at him. Around the fires we soon fell asleep, for we were all worn out with our long march in the sultry heat of the day before. I was wakened about 5 o'clock by my comrade Mackie, who sprang up and cried, "Damn your eyes, boys, there's the bugle." After I had eaten my ration of stirabout, a mix of oatmeal and water, I was sent forward on picket, to the road 200 yards in front to watch the enemy. It was daylight, and the sun was every now and again sending bright flashes of light through the broken clouds. As I stood behind the straggling hedge and low beech trees that skirted the high banks of the sunken road on both sides, I could see the French army drawn up in heavy masses opposite me. It was a splendid show. Every now and then the sun lit up the whole country. No one who saw it could ever forget it. Between 8 and 9 o'clock there was a sudden roll of drums along the whole of the enemy's line, and a burst of music from the bands of 100 battalions came to me on the wind. A strong brigade of Dutch and Belgians marched up with swinging quick step, and turned off at a crossroad between high banks. They looked well in their blue coats with orange and red facings. After the village clocks had struck 11, the guns in the French centre thundered out. I noticed, just in front of me, great columns of infantry beginning to advance over the brow of the hill on their side of the valley, marching straight for us. Then began a tremendous cannonade from the French guns. It was now drawn back, and joined a regiment, which was being moved forward to the left, under better cover, near a wood, as the shot and shell were flying about us, and ploughing up the earth around. We had hardly reached our position when a great fusillade commenced just in front of us, and we saw the Highlanders moving up towards the road to the right. Then, suddenly, a great noise of firing. The general of the Union Brigade, Sir William Ponsonby, came riding up to us. Beside him was his aide-de-camp, Dubiously Evans. In his long cloak and great cocked hat, he rode up to watch the fighting below. He ordered us forward to within 50 yards of the beech hedge by the roadside. From our new position, we could make out the 3 regiments of Highlanders, only 1,000 in all, bravely firing down on the advancing mass of Frenchmen. These numbered thousands, and those on our side of the Brussels road were divided into 3 solid columns. Our general and his aide-de-camp rode off to the right by the side of the hedge. Then suddenly, I saw Dubiously Evans wave his hat, and immediately, our colonel, Inglis Hamilton, shouted out,
"Now, Scots Greys!"
and waving his sword in the air, he rode straight at the hedges in front, which he took in grand style. At once a great cheer rose from our ranks, and we too waved our swords and followed him. It was a grand sight to see the long line of giant grey horses dashing along with flowing manes and heads down, tearing up the turf about them as they went. The men in their red coats and tall bearskins were cheering loudly, and the trumpeters were sounding the charge. Our colonel went on before us, past our guns and down the slope, and we followed. We saw the Royals and Enniskillens clearing the road and hedges at full gallop away to the right. Almost single-handed, Sergeant Ewart had captured the Imperial Eagle of the 45th Invincibles. We cried out, "Well done, my boy," and as others had come up, we spurred on in search of a like success. We were saluted with a sharp fire of musketry, and again found ourselves beset by thousands of Frenchmen. We had fallen upon a second column. They were also fusiliers. Trumpeter Reeves of our troop, who rode by my side, sounded a rally, and our men came swarming up from all sides, some Enniskillens and Royals being amongst the number. We at once began a furious onslaught on this obstacle, and soon made an impression. The battalions seemed to open out for us to pass through, and so it happened that in 5 minutes we had cut our way through as many thousands of Frenchmen. We had now reached the bottom of the slope. There the ground was slippery with deep mud. Urging each other on, we dashed towards the batteries on the ridge above, which had worked such havoc on our ranks. The ground was very difficult, and especially where we crossed the edge of a ploughed field, so that our horses sank to their knees as we struggled on. My brave rattler was becoming quite exhausted, but we dashed ever onwards. At this moment Colonel Hamilton rode up to us crying,
"Charge for the guns!"
and went off like the wind, up the hill, towards the terrible battery that had made such deadly work among the Highlanders. It was the last we saw of our colonel. Poor fellow! His body was found with both arms cut off. His pockets had been rifled. I once heard Major Clark tell how he saw him wounded among the guns of the great battery, going at full speed, and with the bridle reins between his teeth, after he had lost his hands. Then we got among the guns, and we had a revenge. Such slaughtering! We sabred the gunners, lamed the horses, and cut their traces and harness. I can hear the Frenchmen yet crying, "Diable!" when I struck at them, and the long-drawn hiss through their teeth as my sword went home. 15 of their guns could not be fired again that day. The artillery drivers sat on their horses weeping aloud as we went among them. They were mere boys, we thought. Then we saw a party of horsemen in front of us, on the rising ground near a farmhouse. There was the little corporal himself, as his veterans had called Bonaparte. We learned later what the Emperor thought of us. On seeing us clear the second column and commence to attack his 80 guns on the centre, he cried out,
"These Greys are terrible. Look at how they fight."
You can imagine my astonishment when down below, on the very ground we had crossed, appeared at full gallop a couple of regiments of cuirassiers on the right, and away to the left a regiment of lancers. I shall never forget the sight. The cuirassiers, in their sparkling steel breastplates and helmets, mounted on strong black horses, with great blue rugs across the croups, were galloping towards me, tearing up the earth as they went. The trumpets blowing wild notes in the midst of the discharges of grape and canister shot from the heights. Around me there was one continuous noise of clashing arms, shouting of men, neighing and moaning of horses. What were we to do? Behind us we saw masses of French infantry, with tall fur hats, coming up at the double. And between us and our lines, these cavalry. There being no officers about, we saw nothing for it but to go straight at them and trust to Providence to get through. There were half a dozen of us Greys, and about a dozen of the Royals and Enniskillens on the ridge. We all shouted, "Come on lads, that's the road home." and dashing her spurs into her horse's sides, set off straight for the lancers. But we had no chance. I saw the lancers rise and fall for a moment, and Sam Tar, the leading man of ours, go down amid the flash of steel. I felt a sudden rage at this, for I knew the poor fellow well. He was a corporal in our troop. The crash as we met was terrible. The horses began to rear and bite, and neigh loudly, and then some of our men got down among their feet, and I saw them trying to ward off the lancers with their hands. "Stick together, lads," we cried, and went at it with a will, slashing about us right and left, over our horses' necks. It was just then I caught sight of a squadron of British dragoons, making straight for us. The Frenchmen at that instant seemed to give way, and in a minute more, we were safe. The dragoons gave us a cheer and threw back the lancers into the hollow. How I reached our lines I can hardly say, for the next thing I remember is that I was lying with the sole remnants of our brigade, in a position far away, to the right and rear of our first post. There were scarcely 100 of the Greys left out of the 300 who rode off half an hour before. How I escaped is a miracle, for I was through the thick of it all, and received only 2 slight wounds. That, my friends, is why the name of the Union Brigade was honoured throughout the land.